our mini speaker of the day, Brian John. For those of you who don't know, and I'm sure there's not many people who aren't up with the facts, Brian and company took off some months ago for a trip to Europe, England, France, so on, and he's going to tell us something about that today. Thanks, Brian. Thanks, Brian. In relation to the tour, well, you know, you all know Bob Russell, and of course Bob is a very lovable character and little roly-poly fellow. Of course, when we got to France, he started wearing a French beret, and it was very difficult to tell that he wasn't French. But what sort of a Frenchman? Was he a French peasant? No, you wouldn't say Bob was a French peasant under any circumstances. Maybe the nearest was you could say that he was a retired French chef. And he really carried the part off very well. He took Tony to the Follies, which Tony appreciated, and he had a camera in which I probably shot several thousand photos. But he's still over there. He's in America at the moment. I don't know whether he's due back this month or next month, but you can bet your boots that he's having a fantastic time. But when we got to England, of course, he put the French beret away, and he started wearing an English checked cap or hat, which made him look part of the landed gentry. And Bob's always been in the landowner, so that suited him right down to the T. He squired Maureen Bellett around assiduously, probably took her to almost every stage show in London, but I strongly suspect that she had to pay her own way in. Tony Paterson. Tony was our oldest member. He was in England on flying duties when D-Day started, but he was sick, so he wasn't actually able to fly then, but as soon as he got better, he was flying DC-3s, carting stores in. He didn't miss anything, except that one day he walked out of the accommodation place where we were staying, and there was building activity outside, and he fell over on a piece of timber that he admitted afterwards wasn't even there. And he got carted off to St Thomas Hospital. And those of you who are familiar with London know that it's just across the Thames from Big Ben. And they looked after him marvellously well, except he came back with a great big patch on his forehead, and the biggest black eye that you've ever seen. But that didn't hold him up for very long. He had a couple of days rest, and then he was back into it. And he saw Bob's cap, or hat, little check cap. So the next thing we know, he bought one himself, because he wanted to look like the Ravenswood Squire, which is really what he is. And so I got a bit jealous too. So we got to Bath, and I was in the Edinburgh wool factory, and there were a number of hats in there as well. So I sort of picked one out, and Mari Paterson, who's very, very good on fashion and so on, and also a particularly lovely person, I took the hats over to her and said, could you pick one out for me? So she did. So I was very proudly wearing them. So the three of us all had these nice checked hats. So what I want to do now, talk to you mainly about the visit to the schools at Villers-Bretonneux, because many of you were here when Catherine Rimmer came across from Victoria to talk to us about it just prior to us leaving on our trip, which was in late February. And I might add, I've spoken to her since, and it was one of the experiences of her life to come across here, never been to the West before, but in particular to come to a meeting like she attended that day, and she's absolutely dying to come back again. You can understand that I would be remiss though if I didn't mention that the tour was an outstanding success and one that we will always remember. And it was due in large part to the fantastic job that Tony Munday did in putting it all together. And we would all absolutely agree with that. The party comprised 13 people. which was really an ideal number, and most of us went business class via Hong Kong, which was also an ideal way to travel. Business class, first class might have been better, but business was pretty good. Tony spent 16 years in total in Hong Kong, so I can tell you this, he walked us over most of it, and also arranged for us to become honorary members of the Hong Kong Journalists Club, where we had the opportunity to meet some very interesting people. And also, George Howe found a novel way to buy things that he didn't really need, didn't you, George?
Yeah.
In London, it was a similar story because Tony knew the city just as well, and he saved us money by walking us to most of the places. Fortunately, London, of course, as a lot of you know, is made for walking. An inspired choice was to book us into the RAF Club, which is in Pall Mall, and about 5 minutes walking distance from Buckingham Palace down through St James Park. The club has 20,000 members, and a huge number of paintings of aeroplanes and service scenes and so on, and very high standards of dress and behaviour. And it also gave us the chance to meet some priceless people who just exuded that Air Force background in the same way as this meeting does, these meetings do. We went to France via Dover and Calais and then drove to Amiens. Amiens, I'm told, is the right pronunciation, for our first night on French soil. Now the country is very open and almost totally in crop, and it was because it was springtime over there, it was particularly nice and all the crops were green. It would have been, as an open countryside, I noted it would have been almost perfect for the blitzkrieg top warfare 1940. And it's interesting that those tactics were originally devised by General Charles de Gaulle, but they were pinched very successfully by the Germans. However, in their first war, it was just, they were just coming out of the horses era. So that is why, I guess, trench warfare developed. Villers-Bretonneux is 20 kilometres east of Amiens and is probably about the size of Northern, just at a rough guess. It was captured by the Germans in 1918, but recaptured by mainly Australian troops on the 25th of April 1918 in a series of savage and prolonged assaults under General Monash that caused the Germans to surrender in November 1918. Australia's role in the liberation has never been forgotten by the people of the town. We drove first to the Jacques Bry High School, which has 350 students, and where we were to meet up with Evelyn Paterson, who had worked with Catherine to organise our visit. Our first impression was of the obvious feelings for Australia, with paintings of Australian scenes, animals, etc. in the entrance. We were taken into a classroom with about 40 students around 15 years of age, and we had an animated discussion after we'd all introduced ourselves. One of our members, Jenny Mills, played a very valuable role in the discussions, as her maternal grandfather, a doctor named George Barber, was a colonel at Gallipoli in later France, and he helped develop advanced casualty treatment techniques. As a Major General, he later became Director of Medical Services and later still a doctor in Kalgoorlie. Question time was lively and interesting. In fact, you know, you never know what sort of questions are going to come up. One girl asked me what my favourite colour is. and I said green because I'm a farmer and I like the colour of growing grass, and there's not too much at the present time. But we next went to the Victoria School, which is a primary school with about 140 students. And from a classroom, we looked out onto a quadrangle with a big sign saying, "We will never forget Australia." And in fact, these signs were at both schools and very prominently displayed. As most of you know, the school was rebuilt after the First War by funds raised by the school children of Victoria, hence the name. And for the occasion, I'd prepared a short speech which Margaret Chesborough put into French for me, and it would be worth reading if I brought it. The best part of it was that because I'd written it out in English underneath so that I'd understand the words. She told me afterwards that she understood it and all the children understood it too. We found that the French have a very high regard for Australians, and we tried to use French when possible, and our favourite expression was merci beaucoup, which means thank you very much. From the school we travelled about 5 kilometres to a war grave cemetery, which is on elevated ground with sweeping views of the country, and as is usual, it was beautifully maintained. There are, I believe, about 1,100 Australians buried there, as well as soldiers from other Allied countries. I noted one 19-year-old RAF pilot who was buried on the 19th of November, so obviously he must have been badly wounded just prior to the end of the war. And I also noted another soldier from the Victorian Battalion, 44th Battalion, whose regimental number was only 32, so you could say that he would have gone right through the war, and only in the last 2 or 3 months he was killed, so he would have had to be considered very unlucky. Our lunch, appropriately, was at the Le Kangaroo Cafe, where the cafe owner gave us a rousing send-off, and before we departed for Paris we had a visit to the War Museum that's actually part of the Victoria School. You go upstairs and it's very, very grim but very well done, and it attracted our strong attention. So, ladies and gentlemen, this visit was a happy but emotional experience. It was our first real function as a group, and it set the standard that was maintained right through our tour, typified by Australian comradeship and good humour. Thank you very much.